This one's for you if you're feeling stuck with your music, and especially if you're new to me and Home Studio Corner. My name's Joe Gilder. I started this channel 15 years ago, and in that period of time, I've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people make it over that hump of being frustrated with their music to finally making music that they're proud of. And every one of those people has to go through this aha moment. It's this moment in time that once it happens, things start to click into place, music starts to take off and sound amazing. But it has to happen for everybody, or you remain stuck on this side of the mountain without ever getting to that aha moment, without ever getting to the point where it starts to sound really good. Like I said, my name is Joe Gilder. Why should you listen to me? I'm just a dude on the internet, right? Well, yes, I am. However, I've made a bunch of music here in a home studio. Go listen to it. Go up to your favorite musical platform, search up my name, listen to a few tracks. If you like what you hear, come back here and I'll share with you my thoughts on how to get yourself to the point where the music you're releasing is something you're really proud of. I've actually got a gift I want to give you. I'll tell you about it at the end of the video, but this will help you get to that aha moment quicker, so stick around. Now, I'm about to tell you what the aha moment is, and I'm afraid you're going to ignore it. You're going to just kind of nod your head and move along and not really embrace it, because embracing this idea, accepting this idea is the key to unlocking great results in your studio. And the longer you put this off, the longer you're going to have to wait before those results start to sound great. So what is the aha moment? It's simply embracing the concept of getting it right at the source. In other words, making the recording sound as good as possible before you ever move into mixing. Now, before you click that next video button, I know you're thinking about it. You're probably thinking, yeah, Joe, of course, I've heard you say that before. I get that. I'm all on board with get it right at the source. Let's move on to the good stuff. If your music doesn't sound the way you want it to, if your music doesn't sound great, you do not understand get it right at the source yet. Now, there's a test that you can run to see if you are getting it right at the source, but if your music isn't coming out the way you want, there's a good chance you haven't nailed this part of the process, and nothing will change until you do. Let me tell you a story of how this plays out for the average person. This is an amalgamation of lots of different stories I've heard over the years because they all are pretty similar. You start to lay them all on top of each other, and they all start to sound kind of the same. It starts out, a person loves music. They're a musician, songwriter perhaps, and they discover the world of recording. Either they recorded in a studio years ago and they finally want to get into audio recording, or they've waited their entire life to finally just say, I'm going to make an album, and they start to acquire the equipment needed to record music. So it starts with this dream of recording. So like imagine a microphone, bright and shiny. That becomes the thing that you focus your attention on. I'm going to get a microphone. Oh, I need an audio interface. Cool. And then I need software. Cool. Oh, I need speakers and headphones. Cool. And you kind of go down that path, and then you start playing with it, and it's all so fun at the beginning. Look, I'm recording myself. Look, I'm overdubbing myself. This is amazing. And then the newness wears off, and they get to a point where, well, this stuff doesn't sound all that good. What's the problem? That's when they discover mixing. And mixing is the ultimate bright and shiny object. There are faders to move, there are buttons to click, there are knobs to turn, and you could find an infinite number of plugins to buy, all promising to make your mixes sound amazing. And so that's the place where people are when they discover me, usually. They've gotten into mixing and they're trying to learn how to use things like EQs, compressors, things like that. How do I EQ bass guitar? How do I EQ acoustic? How do I compress drums? Things like that. That's a lot of times how people discover me. And I'll teach you how to mix for sure, because mixing is important, and mixing is a whole skill that we have to learn. But I will regularly say, but remember, your mixes are only good as your recordings. I will say, get it right at the source 1,000 times. And they'll usually go, yeah, sure, yep, got it, of course, yeah. Garbage in, garbage out, am I right? But they don't get it. And then that usually leads to some of them eventually take a course from me. So let's say my mixing course. And inside that course, I'm teaching mixing, but I'm also giving you tracks to mix along with me. So they'll eventually import those tracks into their software. They'll hit play, and then they'll notice something. And this is when the aha moment happens. They'll send me an email, and I could almost verbatim read you the email because it's the same every time. They'll say, Joe, I finally got around to mixing your song, the tracks that you recorded. And as soon as I hit play and moved a few faders and panned a few things, it already sounded amazing. It already sounds better than anything I've ever mixed. I finally get this thing you've been saying all the while of get it right at the source. I've assumed that I was getting it right at the source, but I wasn't, because my tracks don't sound nearly as good as your tracks. And by the way, the big punchline isn't I'm recording my tracks in a big major $1 million studio. I'm recording here with oftentimes with microphones that are, a couple $100 through stock preamps on a regular audio interface. No voodoo magic here. It's just skill and learning that whole art of getting it right at the source. Okay, so how do you know if you've done it? How do you know if you've gotten it right at the source? The answer is really simple. There's a simple test that you can run. Play the tracks without any plugins. If it sounds pretty stinking good with just the raw tracks and a basic setting of levels, then you've done it. You've gotten it right at the source. If it does not sound good, if you can't listen to that and connect with it on an emotional or physical level, then you haven't gotten it right at the source. What do we do if we haven't gotten it right? We have two choices. One, you can ignore it and make excuses like, well, I'm in a home studio. That's not a good excuse. I don't have really expensive equipment. That's not an excuse. Oh, I can't play guitar in time. That's not really a good excuse. Those are all excuses. You can either have excuses or you can fix it. And a lot of people will fix it by focusing on, yeah, it doesn't sound great, but I just got this new plugin from XYZ company. It's going to solve everything. And I'm not against plugins. They're great. I've just found the biggest transformation in both my life and the life of my customers is when they transform the recording part. Then the mixing part just kind of happens. Yeah, you got to learn how to do it. You got to learn all the skills of compression and EQ and all of that. But if the recordings are already amazing, mixing's just kind of a afterthought almost. That's how important it is. So the solution is to identify, when you listen to your tracks, you say, well, that's not great. This doesn't sound all that great. Identify which ones don't sound great. I guess it could be all of them, but chances are there's something like the guitars. The guitars don't sound great. Now you've identified the problem and now figure out a solution. I know that sounds like stupid obvious, but solutions typically are going to take a lot of time. The problem is people get excited, they start recording, and they want to rush to the mixing process because let's face it, mixing's really fun. You can do mixing just sitting in a chair. You don't have to set up a microphone. You don't have to play an instrument. There's no stress. You just have to click with a mouse, and you can do that for hours and mess with sound as much as you want. Getting it right at the source, that's more like work. Now, there's something to keep in mind here. I'm not asking you to get it perfectly at the source. The phrase is get it right at the source. They're never going to be perfect, but that's kind of the standard. I want my tracks to sound mixed when I'm done recording, which means I'm doing things like moving the microphone until it sounds amazing, just the raw tracks coming out of the speakers. I've got a recording course. Just saw a comment earlier today where someone said, hey, have you got some mixing going on behind the scene on these guitar tracks that you recorded? Because yours sound way better than mine. You must be mixing them. And so I made a point of saying, hey, I know that's what it sounds like, but that's not what happened. You're hearing the raw tracks. I have spent countless, especially with acoustic guitar, countless hours with me, a microphone, and a guitar, doing that process again and again and again and again. Record some, listen back, that's not it. Move the mic, try it again. And do that times a billion, and you start to get really good at that process to the point where I would put my raw guitar recordings up against anybody because I've done so much work in that regard. They're not perfect. I probably still have to do some EQ on those guitars, but my goal, the standard that we're kind of aiming for, is for it to never need any plugins once I record. That doesn't mean I'm using a bunch of EQ and compression on the way in, by the way. That's almost never the case. It's just a matter of the way I play, the way I record. It's that simple. It's not easy, but it is that simple. This isn't advice that anybody wants. Like the guy who wants six-pack abs but doesn't want to change the way he eats. That's probably not going to happen. Same with audio. If you want great sounding mixes but you don't want to change how you record, I wish you the best, but it just doesn't work that way. If you want to get to that aha moment quicker, I've got a free way that you can do that. If you want to test the waters with me and Home Studio Corner and what we're all about, go to homestudiocorner.com/M MT for Mixed Together. This is a series of free mixing tutorials that I've done on YouTube where I mix a song in its entirety in just a weekly series on YouTube. I believe there are 4 seasons at this point, and you can have access to all 4 songs, all 4 sets of videos, and all 4 multi-tracks. So you can do the whole thing without ever paying a dime. Just go to homestudiocorner.com/MT to check this out. Finally, if this video was helpful for you, would you do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed? And if you want to watch more from me, this is what YouTube thinks you'll like next.